We have arrived at the most disliked entry into the Rocky franchise, Rocky 5 from 1990, written and starring Sylvester Stallone, but the directing duties for Rocky 5 went to the guy who directed the very first Rocky movie, John G. Avildsen. This movie obviously tries to recapture the magic of the first two Rocky movies, not just with its filmmaker, who did a great job with that first movie, but also where the story takes us after Rocky 4. However, a lot of people hate this movie, including Sylvester Stallone himself, which is why there have been rumors of an alternate cut for years, which right now is being rumored to be worked on by Sylvester Stallone, where there's the editing is different, there's more scenes, and the movie's overall better. But we're not going to talk about that today. That'll be a separate video when it ever comes out, if it comes out, which I think it will at some point. Now I want to talk about the theatrical version of Rocky 5, once again starring Sylvester Stallone. As I mentioned, Talia Shire is back as Adrian, Burt Young is Paulie, introducing Sage Stallone, who is Sylvester's real life son, who unfortunately passed away many years after this movie, but still before his own dad did, and introducing Tommy the Duke Morrison, a real boxer. This is the first movie that uses a real life boxer to play the antagonist. And that's something that would be done also in Creed movies and whatnot. And of course in Rocky 6. This is the first time. So this movie, man, Stallone wrote the script, but it just, what I think he was trying to do did not really work. And it pissed off a lot of Rocky fans. However, for a very long time, I liked this movie more than Rocky 4. Right now, I'm not sure how I feel about it. But I will say, when I watched it back the other day to do this video, I don't think it's as bad as everybody thinks. The idea that this is a quote unquote bad movie is nonsense. There's enough heart, there's enough story, there's enough going on. Like, this movie has more story than Rocky 4, and in some ways, here's the controversy, it may have more story than Rocky 3. You know, and that's my favorite one, but I'm objective enough to tell you that when it comes to like story content and characters and development of characters, this movie definitely, I feel, had a lot of that. I think they tried to go back to the roots. The issue was that it broke the formula. And I think that's why a lot of people dislike the film. But I'm telling you now, if you go back and watch this movie now, it's really not that bad. Like, genuinely, it's not that bad. There's a couple of aspects of it that are unbearable. But besides that, there's a lot in this movie to really like. And it's unfortunate that people skip it sometimes because there is good stuff here. Genuinely, there's a lot of good stuff. I never thought it was that bad. So, Rocky 5 picks up right after Rocky 4, and that is the fact that Rocky seems to have brain injuries from his fight with the steroided up, which they admitted to in the movie, Ivan Drago. And they head back to America, and they're back, and Rocky's about to retire, but he is soon introduced to George Washington Duke. Now, George Washington Duke is basically the universe version of Don King. He's basically Don King. That's who he is. He even says only in America in this movie. It's Don King. There's no secret to that being Don King. And Richard Gant understands that and plays him exactly like how Don King would have. Exactly. So he's phenomenal. In many ways, he really does carry this movie. And you know what? Even Tommy Gunn, who Tommy Morrison played him, and Tommy Morrison is not an actor, but even he did okay in this movie. I thought he was fine playing Tommy the Duke Morris, or Tommy the Machine Gun. Tommy the Duke Morrison is his real name. But George Washington Duke tries to goad Rocky into fighting his boxer, Union Kane, who's like a top challenger, but Rocky wants to retire. And that's where we go here. So the first problem here is with Sage Stallone as Rocky's son, Rocky Jr. or Robert Jr. This is the first time I can remember him being referred to as Robert Jr. Rocky, and again, I know that Rocky's real name is Robert, but this is the first movie that actually uses the name Robert. I can't remember the name Robert being used at all in the previous four. Maybe in Rocky 2 they may have said it, but everybody calls him Rocky. It is what it is. But anyways, the real problem with this movie is Stallone's son as a character. The movie tries to be this like it has this core story of Rocky not focusing on his family and instead focusing on getting one last sort of big, I guess, one last shot at the big time by becoming the trainer and manager of Tommy Gunn. And he sort of, in a way, spends more time with him and neglects his family, including his own son, which leads to his son kind of becoming a bad kid. And it's really an annoying character that doesn't belong in this movie. I'm not blaming Sage Stallone for this, to be honest. He was a young kid, literally, in the movie. But the first issue is that Sage Stallone playing Rocky's son, because he's Stallone's real son, dude, he doesn't look anything like the kid from Rocky 4, and he's also much older. So Rocky did not spend 3 years in Russia. Rocky flew back after the fight with Drago, right? A few days after. And then somehow his son looks totally different. That's the first problem with the movie, is that. The second problem with the movie is the fact that Rocky gave Paulie, like, I guess, a version of power of attorney. And as a result of that, they basically didn't really spend the money properly. Basically, Paulie kind of was goaded into signing stuff over to Rocky's accountant, who spent the money the wrong way and didn't even pay the taxes properly. So, because of that, Rocky's home ends up getting mortgaged. Like, a lot of things go bad. So basically, Rocky ends up in the poorhouse because he didn't pay his taxes for years and years, and so on and so forth. He trusted the accountant to do it all, and he wound up being broke. Now, obviously, this is stuff that happens to real athletes. A lot of athletes end up going from being millionaires to being broke because of how they spent their money. You might think that being a multimillionaire is money for life. And if you're good financially, which I've talked about in speakdoms and things like that, you certainly can use that money effectively. But a lot of athletes buy over the top bougie stuff, or they charge it, then they forget to pay it, and they also don't understand that you have to pay taxes. You know, when you get paid money, if you make $1 million and you're a 1099 contractor, you're not really making $1 million. You're making about 600,000, maybe a bit more than that, right? Between 600 and 700,000, because the taxes have to go to Uncle Sam, and that's of course depending on the contract structure. I'm just kind of giving you an example, a very basic example. So this does happen to other athletes, but the fact that it happened to Rocky, I think it pissed off a lot of fans. I get it. So Adrian has to get her job back at the pet store, and Rocky's not really sure what to do, but he finds this kid, Tommy Gunn, and he wants to train him up. And then what ends up happening is, as the film progresses, George Washington Duke gets inside of Tommy Gunn's ear. Tommy Gunn ends up knocking out Union Kane and becoming the heavyweight champion, but we quickly see that he's a paper champion because he never beat Balboa. He never beat anybody that was worth beating for that title that Balboa gave up for retirement. And Union Kane was a bum, as they said. And because of that and the influence of George Washington Duke, Tommy Gunn falls to the dark side. And of course, it leads to the big climax of the film. This movie, though, once you get past Sage Stallone, right, as Rocky's son, once you get past the annoying scenes with him being bullied and then him fighting back, which I liked when he fought back. But yes, he's very annoying in the movie. He's very, like, bratty. When you get past that, if you were to remove all that out of the film, this is a pretty good movie. Let's keep it real. Rocky still wanting to train up-and-coming boxers. I love it. Being inspired by Mick, which, by the way, this movie has one of the most beautiful scenes in it, featuring the return of Burgess Meredith, who was not in Rocky 4, and it's a flashback to the time before the first Rocky finale, the fight with Rocky and Apollo in the first film, where he gives this really emotional speech about how the older you get, you see your friends, dwindle. because they start to die or they start their own families or whatever. And then next thing you know, you're dying alone. And and he thinks that's why people die, because they don't really have a reason to push them in life. And there's definitely a lot of truth to that for a lot of people, and it was powerful. And you know, he gave that speech, "Get up, cause Mickey loves you," which is reiterated in the final fight. I don't understand how somebody can watch that scene and not even get a little bit moved by it. You don't have to get emotional, but just be a little bit moved. I mean, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. Rocky training Tommy Gunn, good stuff, obviously. Good stuff, you know, logical for the Rocky character. And him neglecting his son, besides the fact that his son's annoying, is good stuff. You know, his son becoming a bad kid, it just felt very forced and almost too quick. Now, again, I wonder what scenes might be cut into the director's cut, because this could be fixed. The movie with some editing could be fixed, but the story of Rocky kind of focusing all his attention on like boxing and neglecting his family, and even Adrian calling him out on it, that's good stuff. Adrian redeems herself in this movie. She doesn't have much to do in the sense that she's not the inspiration piece anymore, but what she does do is great. And ultimately, this movie has one of the most manly and alpha finales. Of course, it was, in case you didn't know, it was choreographed by legendary pro wrestler Terry Funk, of all of the movies. I think the fact that this final fight takes place in the streets and this movie has less boxing than the previous entries, I think that might be why people hate this movie. But really, no. Okay, I get it. It's not Rocky getting back into the ring. I understand that. It's not the same thing. Of course, we all see that. However, I love the fact that building up to it, Tommy Gunn pushes Paulie down and hits him. He punches him. You should have left him at the streets where you should have left him on the street where you found him, or whatever he says. And then Rocky says, in the most manly scene maybe of the entire franchise, "You gonna push him down? Or should I pushing me down?" And then George Washington Duke says, "No, save it for the ring. Save it for the ring," because he's a promoter and he wants to make money on Tommy Gunn and Rocky, because Tommy Gunn realizes he gets a major case of imposter syndrome and is tired of being called a bum or a paper champion. And he lets his anger take over him, and then he wants to fight Rocky right then and there. And then Rocky says, "My ring's outside," which is, oh, what a great fucking line. Then they proceed to have this street fight, which I liked. Why did I like it? Because it harkens back to Rocky in the first film, which, by the way, there's a lot of imagery in this film from the first film. Philadelphia, obviously Rocky, you know, wearing his traditional jacket and hat from the first movie. We see that a lot here. You know, it does feel like back to basics type of thing. But that street fight fits in with Rocky's character from back then. Is it smart for him to do that? Of course not. He's got brain injuries. But that's part of the story, is that, you know, Tommy Gunn hits him and he starts having brain injuries, and then he starts thinking about Mick, and that inspires him to fight. "Tommy, one more round." Then they go at it in the streets, and it's a good fight. The street fight was good. The silliness of it was when freaking Rocky Jr.'s like, "Beat him up, Dad. That guy took my room." And that's like one of the most like ridiculous lines ever. And then don't forget when George Washington Duke says, you know, "Touch me and I'll sue." Sue me for what? You know, after he knocks him out. I love it, yo. So I liked it, and I liked seeing Rocky and Robert go up the Rocky steps to end the movie, and they go in the Museum of Art, and he gives him the Rocky Marciano cufflink that Mick gave him. So great movie, man. Great. Okay, not great movie, good movie. I think the criticisms come from the fact that it breaks the formula. It doesn't end with Rocky getting back in the ring. There's not enough fights in it, maybe not enough action, but the story of Rocky getting readjusted to living the poor life, or the, you know, middle class or lower class life, you know, could they have done it better? Yeah. Are there problems? Of course. Do I enjoy this movie? Parts of it, but I don't think it sucks. I think people are way too emotional over that. I don't think it sucks. And ultimately, maybe it did suck as the final entry into Rocky. I would understand that, because if you're looking at this like when I was a kid, Rocky 1, Rocky 2, Rocky 3, 4, and 5, that's it. That's the whole saga. We're done. Bad ending, right? Bad finale. But because there's Rocky Balboa, which I'm going to talk about in the next video, instead of Rocky 6, I'm sorry, instead of Rocky 5 being the end, Rocky 6 became the end of the Rocky story. And even then, there was still Creed, but the Rocky story ends with Rocky 6. And because of that, you know, I feel like it makes this movie a bit more palatable. It really does. And it makes the movie not. I never thought it was a bad movie. There's issues with it, of course. There's writing problems. Yes. But it's nowhere near as bad as people say. And in many ways, I did enjoy it more than Rocky 4. I guess this one doesn't have any training montages with Tommy Gunn. So there is that. But Rocky 4 had so many training montages. It had a few, different ones. So, was one big one. But maybe that's what people have an issue with. I don't know. Ultimately, it's not that bad, bro. And I'll never think it's that bad. There's no bad Rocky movies to date. Next time, I'm talking about one that's definitely not bad, and that is Rocky Balboa. I'll see you in that review. We'll talk then.